You're listening to a message presented at Green Bay First. More information about Green Bay First can be found online at www.greenbayfirst.net. May God draw you closer to Him as you listen.
All right. Let's just start this way. Author and theologian A.W. Tozier said this: because God is self-existent, His love had no beginning. Because He's eternal, His love can have no end. Because He is infinite, it has no limit. Because He's holy, it is the quintessence of all spotless purity. Because He is immense, His love is an incomprehensibly vast, bottomless, shoreless sea. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Say, not really. I missed it. These quotes like this, these theology quotes like this, sometimes they can be good, right? They're good to chew on and wrestle with, and kind of sometimes we can read something like that and immediately feel this worship and this excitement and this understanding. Sometimes we sing songs like this where we talk about bottomless oceans and how God's bigger than the finite. He's infinite and all these big things. And sometimes we use big words and these crazy metaphors, but they're good to chew on and good to talk about a little bit. But you know what the problem is with these kind of quotes? Most people don't get it. Most of us we just can't get there because we have a finite mind, right? And so we struggle to understand what is going on with a shoreless ocean, right? We struggle to understand that. It doesn't mean anything to us, especially if we're just seeking or we're just now became Christians not too long ago or something like that. These kind of quotes really just go over your head and you don't really know what they mean. And so I like them. They're good. But most of us will understand God's love better in the context of personal illustrations. And even better if those personal illustrations have to do with relationships that we consider to be like our highest relationships within our lives. And so the ones that we're always thinking about and always in. And so like father to daughter or brother to brother, mother, son, those kind of relationships. Let me show you what I mean. Compare the Tozier quote that I just said to this much shorter verse in Psalm 103. It says this in verse 13. As a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear Him. As a father shows his compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to you and to me. A lot of us can grasp this simple verse better than we can grasp that quote, right? We can grasp it better. We can get there quicker. God loves us and shows compassion like a good father does to his children. Most people can relate to that. Even if your father wasn't that good, maybe your mother was, and you can still relate to this. Or if your father and mother both weren't good to you and didn't love you and didn't show you compassion, if you're a father or a mother, you've got kids now, you're still able to relate to this, right? These big, deep theological statements are good to wrestle with and chew on and think about, but you and I, we are not machines built on logic alone, right? We are human beings that understand God and our lives in the context of relationships, right? That's the way we understand God and His great love for us in the context of our relationships. And that's why Jesus teaches the way He does. Did you ever notice Jesus doesn't just make a bunch of theological statements? He doesn't, like this Tozier quote, He's not going to say something like that. He just doesn't speak that way, right? He just doesn't do that. And this is why he doesn't. He knows the way we understand best. Like last week, I talked to you about two parables that Jesus told at the beginning of Luke 15. There was this shepherd that had lost a sheep, right? And he left the 99 and he went to find the one. And then there was this woman who had lost a coin, and she had 10 coins. She lost one, and she's searching and searching and searching to find this one lost coin. The woman finds the coin, the shepherd finds the sheep, and they throw a party, right? And Jesus goes, the kingdom of heaven is like that because God loves lost people. God values lost people. And God chases after lost people. And you can understand that, right? Because it was in the context of this story and in the context of relationships. This is how I imagine Jesus teaching and preaching. I don't think that he's always grabbing like a bunch of notes like I do and getting on behind a stand or a pulpit and having a message. I think really what he's doing is he's just walking down the streets with his disciples and he goes, oh, wait, hold up, look over there for a second. You guys see, do you see that lady over there? You see how she's like just flipping out because she lost something. She's searching under the couches. She's sweeping. She lost a coin. She's got 10, but she lost 1. You know, the kingdom of heaven is like that, Jesus says. Or they're out walking in the countryside and they see some sheep and they notice that there's a ton of sheep over here and the shepherd's going the other way and the disciples are like, what's going on over there? And Jesus goes, you guys see that shepherd? He's going after one sheep. Look, there's like 99 sheep over there. He's leaving all the 99 and he's going for the one. You know, the kingdom of heaven is like that. God loves you like that shepherd loves this lost sheep. Isn't that how Jesus is teaching? But isn't that the way he comes across? He wants to teach us in a way that makes sense to us in our context. He's good like that, right? He runs after us, he says in Luke 15. When we're at our worst, when we're sinners and we're lost and we've got no love for him, no realization of our sin, no turning to him, no anything like that, just lost in darkness, he runs to us. And while we're still sinners, Romans 5 says, he dies for us. That was last week. If you missed it, you can grab the podcast online. But this is Jesus talking to us where we're at, speaking to us where we are, where we can understand best in our context. And so in the Gospel of Luke chapter 15, he talks about these 2 lost parables, and then there's a third parable that we're going to talk about today, and it's connected to these other lost parables that we talked about last week. It is probably the most known parable. It's this one and the Good Samaritan. These are the 2 most known parables. People know this story, right? Even if you don't know Jesus, you know this story. Even if you hate Jesus, you know this story, all right? It's the story of what? The prodigal son. Everybody say prodigal son. That's the story of the prodigal son. How many of you have heard of the story of the prodigal son? If you're not raising your hand, you're lying. Okay, all right. You lied in church and God's mad. All right. So he takes these big theological ideas, Jesus does, and he doesn't make this multi-level big theology statement. Instead, he tells us a story. He tells us a story, puts it in a way that anyone can grasp. And so as we study this today, I want you to hear this. First of all, the name is the parable of the prodigal son. Jesus didn't name his parables, okay? So it's the parable of the prodigal son. But how many of you have read this? You read this before? How many sons are there? 2, right? There's 2 sons, right? An older and a younger son mentioned in this parable. And so everybody say 2 sons. Just so 2 sons. So 2 things that I want you to think of as we study this. Number 1, which son am I? Which son do I relate with most? Which son am I? And then number 2, this is really a parable not about sons, but about a father, a God who loves you, right? And God's great love for you. And so I want you to ask, which son am I? But then I want you to ask, what does Jesus' story tell me about God's love for me, how he deals with me, how he loves me? And so those are the things I want you to think about. Look at verse 11, and we'll get into this story that Jesus is telling in Luke 15. It says this, and Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. And he, the father, divided his property between them. How many sons did he have? 2. Yeah, this guy had 2 sons. It's called the parable of the 2 sons. No, it's the parable of the prodigal son, but it's still 2 sons. So the younger son comes to the father and he goes, give me my inheritance. I want it now. So basically, here's what he's saying. He's going, so you're still kicking. That's good for you. It's not so great for me. I've been waiting for a while. I kind of wish you were dead. Isn't that what he said? I mean, I want your inheritance. When do you get inheritance usually? When they die, right? When somebody dies. And so he's going, hey, Dad, love you. Could you die sooner so I can have my money? Anybody said that to you before? Okay, good. I was just checking. Hopefully not. But this son goes up and says, hey, can you go ahead and give it to me earlier? If you're going to keep living, why don't you go ahead and give it to me now so I can get out of here? I don't want this anymore. So he wanted freedom, didn't he? I mean, he wanted a life where he could get up when he wanted to get up. He could go where he wanted to go. He could brush his teeth or not. Whenever he wanted. He didn't want to listen. He didn't want the chores. He didn't want the farm. He didn't want all of that. He wanted to get out. He wanted out. He didn't want to work hard and wait and enjoy the pleasures of life along with the hardships as they come like everybody else does. He wanted freedom now. And some of us are like this, right? I mean, you might not, hopefully you're not going to your parents like, hey, would you die sooner? Because I kind of want your money. Hopefully you're not doing that, but you're failing at this idea of delayed gratification. And you're living as if you are owed and entitled everything good right now and none of the bad. And you've decided, you've deceived yourself into thinking that a change in venue, a new car, a new house, a new spouse, whatever is going to fix this problem, is going to fix what's broken on the inside of you. You're not content, satisfied, fulfilled with what God has given you now. And you have this crazy idea that you would be if you just had the job, the wife, the place, the car, the money, the whatever. But here's the thing. You are not dissatisfied because your life lacks joy and freedom. You are dissatisfied because you've minimized your joy and freedom. Let me say that again. You are not dissatisfied because your life lacks joy and freedom. You are dissatisfied because you have minimized your joy and freedom. Does that make sense? This son had a great life. I mean, his family was pretty wealthy. They had servants, friends. He had a loving father, a future, and yet he still wanted out. He still thought things would be better if he got the money now and changed venues. Can you imagine what the father is feeling and thinking in this moment? Sons and daughters rarely do, right? They rarely take that into account. But this father had to be devastated. He had to have asked his son to stay, pleaded with him to change his mind, begged him to stick around, not to do this. But after arguments and debates and threats, he finally just decided that this is the only way his son would learn if he ever would. And so he gave him his inheritance. Brokenhearted, he gave it into his son's request. I imagine the son is leaving this exchange like chest puffed out, head held high, smiling like he just negotiated the best deal of his life, right? Like, all you suckers, you have to wait till your dad dies to get the money. I just got my dad's money. I'm out. I mean, he thinks he's made the deal of his life. And I imagine the father, not so much. Imagine the father walking away, stooped in sadness, just shaking his head, tears coming down his face, praying that his son would change his mind, would come to his senses before it's too late. This is heartbreaking. If you're a loving parent of even smaller kids, you've probably felt at least a twinge of this, right? A moment when a son or a daughter wants to rebel against your great love for them because they don't see what you see, don't understand how much you love them, that you are not the enemy of their joy. When my kids have that moment where they rebel, where they, with their words and their actions, go, no, I do not want your love. I do not trust that you want the best for me. I want my way. I want to do it my way. I want my joy. I want out. I don't trust you. You don't love me. You don't want my joy. I want to go the opposite direction from you. When they look at me as the enemy to their joy, it's heartbreaking, isn't it? Some of you had have had grown children just leave and never come back. They couldn't wait until they were 18 so they could just bail. And they've run after freedom and fulfillment, all the while not realizing your desire was to help them find that. Some of you are the teenagers or the young adults acting like idiots. But you won't listen to me today because you're too smart, right? Too right. Too deserving of everything you could possibly want. Entitled. It's heartbreaking if you're the parent. Look at verse 13. It says this: "Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything." Okay, so the younger son gets the money and he takes off to another country. He goes on a tour of Europe, just spending everything on what the Bible calls reckless living. He squanders all of it. I imagine he made a lot of friends real fast, right? Friends who just kind of flocked around and go, "You're awesome, you're going somewhere, you're funny, you're fun to be around, we love you, you're our friend, let's do this forever." But really, they're just there because he's spending so much money, right? They're just there to get a piece of the inheritance and have some fun while they're doing it. Everyone flocked to him to get a piece. But then there was no money. The money ran out, and so did the friends. And he was in trouble. And the way it reads here is that he ran out of money and he might have been okay, but a famine came into the land. And he didn't have anything. He didn't have inheritance, no respectable job, no rich friends, nothing. And so he hires himself out to a Gentile as a servant. And what you need to understand is that this would have been unbelievably humiliating for a Jew to work for a Gentile. Like the Jews that believed themselves to be God's chosen people above all other people groups. And so to work for a Gentile as a Jew is just not, it's not a good idea. And you would feel this humiliation. It was a huge slap in the face. And not only that, but he wasn't like, high up in this Gentiles organization, was he? I mean, he wasn't like taking care of other slaves and kind of directing the operations. No, he was feeding pigs. He was doing things that nobody else wanted to do. He was on the bottom of the totem pole here, right? And again, this is another slap in the face for a Jew that isn't supposed to eat pigs, touch pigs, be near pigs, right? And yet, he's humiliated and he's having to feed these pigs. And on top of that humiliation, he's starving. Literally. He has no food to eat. He's starving. And Jesus says he's so hungry. He's looking at the slop that the pigs are eating and he's going, "I'm about to die. I am so hungry. Nobody's bringing me bread. Nobody's helping me. All my friends are gone. If I don't eat this slop, I'm probably going to die. I am starving here." I mean, just a few moments or months before, he was hanging out with new friends at the best restaurants. Now he's hanging out with pigs around a feeding trough, right? Things have changed. Everybody say things have changed. Have you ever been there? Maybe not around the feeding trough of pigs. Maybe, I don't know. But things didn't work out the way you planned. You made some mistakes. You burned some bridges. Now you're having to pay the price and deal with the consequences. Now you're just regretting in the deepest part of your stomach, the pit of your stomach. You're just starting to regret what you did, what you said, what you took, how you ended things. You're going, "Oh, Dad was right. Mom was right. My boss was right. Man, I messed that up. My pastor was right." Maybe not the last one. But you're regretting things. Things didn't work out. Here's the thing. We have all been there. And in some way, big or small, we will all be there again, right? Unless somehow you've found the perfection potion, like all of a sudden you're perfect and you don't make mistakes. Anybody? Then if that's you, yeah, you're not allowed here. Okay, we don't know perfect people allowed. We just want the imperfect ones. And so unless you're perfect, you're going to find this to be true in some way in the future as you make another mistake. And that regret, that sinking feeling, that clarity that no one is to blame but you, listen, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. That's good. That's step one. Everybody say step one. It's called godly sorrow. Sorrow over sin and the mistakes you've made. It's good. It's a good thing. So don't run away from it, because I think our tendency in our culture is to feel a little guilt and go, don't make me feel guilty. I don't want guilt. I'm imperfect like everybody else. Everybody makes mistakes. It's no big deal, right? Our tendency in our culture is to be like, whoa, guilt. I don't know, Pastor. I don't know. I'm feeling kind of bad about that, so I'm out. I don't want to feel guilty. And that's our tendency. Just be you. You're a good person. I think our tendency is to leave it, to run from it, distract ourselves so we don't have to deal with it. So when we feel that regret, when we feel that godly sorrow, we turn the TV on, we get on Facebook, we look at Pinterest, we put the earphones in, anything we can do to distract ourselves from feeling this regret, from feeling this godly sorrow, feeling that we've messed up and owning up to it. But listen, that's a mistake. Because it's a good thing. It's from God. We have to embrace it. But listen, beloved. Don't stay there too long. Right? Don't stay in godly sorrow too long either. I think our tendency is either to run from it and convince ourselves that it's not that big of a deal and we didn't really mess up and it's really their fault. And to do that, it's either to do that or it's to wallow in this sorrow for eternity, right? Like pigs. And so we are a culture of extremes, are we not? Hasn't that come out lately? Like in the political world? Kind of extreme, right? We are a culture of extremes. And so we have this tendency to just run from godly sorrow and act like it's not a big deal, or to just wallow in it forever and never get out of it. This son in Luke 15, he realizes his sin, his mistake, his error in judgment, his entitlement, and the breaking of his father's heart. He's literally in a pigsty. He could just brush it off. Or he could drop to his knees with the pigs and eat their food. He could decide that this is the just consequence for his behavior. And okay, well, I messed up, so I guess I'm just going to eat pig food the rest of my life. He deserves it. He'll just eat pig food. Those are two options, but there's a third option, isn't there? And the younger son is not going to make another second massive mistake in his life. So look what he does in verse 17. But when he, what? Came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And so he goes, I've made a mistake. I've burned bridges. I've caused problems. I was wrong. I broke my father's heart. Look at how I've messed this thing up. And he doesn't brush it off. He doesn't brush off that godly sorrow, but he doesn't stay there either. He doesn't accept his station as a Jewish pig herder as an eternal punishment. He doesn't eat the pig food. Look at the first part of that. It says that, but he came to himself. In other words, he woke up, right? He all of a sudden he woke up. He woke up. He was spiraling down into this self-pity and this guilt, but he came to himself and he decided he wasn't going to keep spiraling down into that pit. He goes, I got to go back home. I got to apologize. I got to make things right. I got to say I'm sorry. And notice he's not thinking that he won't have to deal with the consequences of his mistakes, right? He's going, I won't even go as a son. I'll go as a servant. I'll go apologize, and I'm not asking to be honored son, Father. I'm just asking that you would treat me like a hired servant. At least I'll get paid, and I'll eat, and I'll get to be near my family, right? He's not trying to shirk the consequences either. So step 1 is godly sorrow over your sin, but don't forget step 2. Step 2 is go home. Go home. Confess, apologize, reconcile with the ones you hurt and with God. Go home. Don't brush it off and stay there. Go home. The son does that, doesn't he? And he's rehearsing his apology to his dad all the way back. This is what I'll say to him. I'm sorry. I've sinned against God and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be your son. Just treat me like a hired servant. And he's walking back and he's going, what is my dad going to think when I get there? He's got to hate me. He's got to be mad. He's going to be fiery and red. And I don't even think he's going to let me in, but I'm just going to try to get these words in. Father, I'm sorry. I sinned against heaven and against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be your son. Just let me be a hired servant. And he's just saying that over and over and over. Father, I've sinned against heaven and I've sinned against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be your son. Let me be a hired servant. He's rehearsing this and rehearsing this and rehearsing this as he heads home. But what he doesn't realize is that his father has been waiting for him, watching for him, hoping for his return this whole time. He hasn't forgotten him. His father knew him more than he ever realized. He knew his gait. He knew his movements. He knew his facial expressions. He could have spotted his son a mile off. Look at what happens in verse 20. And he arose and came to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe, put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. So his dad's been waiting for him, and he sees him while he's still a long way off. And what does he do? He runs. He runs to him. He runs to his son, the same son who disrespected him, hurt him, tore his heart out, abandoned him. He runs to that son. And he throws his arms around him and begins kissing him. And what does the son do? He starts into his speech, right? He's already been rehearsing this, and he goes, Father, just let me talk for a second. I imagine his dad's just hugging him and kissing him and not letting him get a word in edgewise. And the son is finally like, Dad, just let me say something. And the father goes, okay, what do you want to say, son? I'm so glad you're here. What do you want to say? And the son goes, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And the father just stops looking at him. He just looks at the servant. He goes, oh, yeah, that's great, son. Just a second. Hey, can you get some clothes for this boy? My son does not wear clothes like this. What are you wearing on your feet? Get sandals. We need some sandals. And the son's like, Dad, I got something to tell you. And he's going, kill the calf. Let's throw a party. My son who was dead is now alive. It's as if he's saying, he doesn't even get to finish his apology, does he? He doesn't even get to say the hired servant part. He doesn't even get to that. His dad just cuts him off. It's as if his dad is saying, listen, son, you're talking about worth, but I want you to hear something. Your worth has nothing to do with your station as my son. That's never come into play. You don't have to be worthy to be my son. It was never based on what you did or didn't do. You're my son no matter what. Nothing could change that. Here's a ring. Nothing could change that. Let's go eat. This dad had this great love for his son. Jesus is saying here that your Father in heaven loves you like that too. Listen, beloved, your worthiness is not a factor. Your production and performance, those aren't factors here. When it comes to your place in the heart of God, when it comes to God's great love for you, what you did or didn't do is not a factor. All that matters is that you come home. All that matters is that you come home. And this is the crux of the gospel, isn't it? I mean, you messed up, sure. You can't fix yourself, sure. You're sinful, sure. But also, that when you come back home, there is a Father who's been watching and hoping for your return. There is this Father who loves you, and He's got His arms wide open, and He's ready to embrace you, hug you, receive you, kiss you, welcome you. Listen, this is huge. Write this down. Memorize this. The truest of Christians is equally convinced of these two facts. Sin is serious, but God's grace is enough. Let me say it again. The truest of Christians is equally convinced of these two facts. Sin is serious, but God's grace is enough. You messed it up. You burned the bridge. You didn't listen. You chose yourself over others and God. You lied. You cheated. You looked at porn. You were mean. You had that thought. You had that motive. Sin is serious. But don't stop there. Move on to step 2. Go home. But God won't want me. His grace is enough. Pastor, you don't know what I did. You're right, I don't know. I don't care. It doesn't matter because God's grace is enough because 100% is 100%. Jesus covered it all, didn't He? There's no place you could go that He couldn't reach. Sin is serious, but God's grace is enough. Go home. He's waiting. This is the good news, isn't it? The gospel. This is God's great love for you and for me. Now, it would be great if this story just ended there, right? Awesome story. This kid messes up, comes back, comes home, apologizes, repents. The father doesn't hold it against him, loves him. What a great story about reconciliation, right? But it doesn't end there. How many sons are there? 2. One father, 2 sons. We know the first one. Let's meet the second one. He's the one that stayed home while the younger son went out and wasted all the money. He's the one that's been with the father this whole time. Verse 25. Now his older son was in the field. And as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked him what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound. Your brother has come, and there's a party. So he's working out in the field like he is every day. He's on his way home. He's tired. He hears the welcome party happening. There's dancing. There's music. He's like, what is going on? Calls over a servant and goes, hey, what's going on up there? And the servant's like, oh, you haven't heard? I'm so glad to be the one to tell you. Your brother's back. Isn't that awesome? He was dead, now he's alive. We thought he'd never be back. He's back. I'm so glad I get to be the one to tell you. Let's go party. He killed the calf. Your dad killed the fattened calf, the one that's been the fat one. He killed it. Let's go eat. He's excited. And so this brother is just going to start running, isn't he? He's going to run to his younger brother, hug him, eat some beef, eat some steak. Let's see, verse 28. But he, the older brother, the older son, was what? Angry. He was angry. And he refused to go into the party. His father came out and entreated him, begged him. But he answered his father, look, these many years I've served you. I've never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. Sometimes you get mad about not getting a young goat. It just happens. Verse 30. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him, the fat one? Come on. And he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost, and now he's found. The older son is not happy. He's not glad. He's angry. He feels cheated. He feels like his dad isn't being fair. And listen, this older son is not a bad guy. I mean, he's working hard. He's the favored son. He's the responsible one. He's respectable, obedient, honoring, dutiful, right? He's steady, moral, sensible. He's the good son. But he's also a little self-righteous, isn't he? The younger son is the one running from God and trying everything out in the world, money, drugs, sex, status, alcohol, to fill this void in his life. But the older son, that's more like you and me, isn't it? The older son is the church person. They're here. They're not out there messing around. They're right here in the church, serving, working. And when someone comes in from out there, that scary world, from living in the world, these are the ones that can't celebrate in here. They think, what's with that? Oh my God, did you see that guy's tattoos? Oh my God, did you hear what she said? Did you see what she's wearing? Oh my, I don't want that in here. I don't want that in here. That's the church person. Or when someone has something good happen to them, God gives them a promotion, a gift to sing on the worship team, a good husband, whatever. These are the people who are thinking, seriously, God, them? How many of you are honest enough to be there? Like, them? Come on. You gave it to them? Like, I've been in here working for 10 years for you, faithful. They've been out partying and drinking. You gave that to them? Come on, God. I was here working at the Easter extravaganza, the Easter outreach, and they were out drinking. Didn't you see them, God? Why are you rewarding them? You should be rewarding me. Why'd you give that to them? Why not me? I could be wrong, but I think there are more of us who can relate to the older son than the younger son. And here's what you older sons and daughters need to understand. It's possible to leave the father without ever leaving the farm. It's possible to drift away from God without ever drifting too far from the church building. The younger son left physically, ran after all these worldly things, but the older son left too. Didn't he? He left in his heart. He left in his mind. He left in his attitude. He just said in that passage, when that son of yours comes back, you throw this party for him. He didn't say, that brother of mine, right? He didn't say, my younger brother. He said, that son of yours, when he comes back. He responded to his brother's return, not with joy and forgiveness like his father had, but with anger and judgmentalism. His heart, this older son's heart had long ago departed from the heart of his father, hadn't it? So, you want to know if your heart is like this? If your heart has departed from the heart of God, if you're the older son, it's easy to figure out. Just look at how you respond when someone else gets something you want. What do you think when someone you think isn't as close to God or as faithful to God gets something that you want? That's your litmus test, isn't it? How do you respond? And here's another test. How interested are you in people like the younger son coming home? How interested are you in that? In the younger sons of this world, the ones who have gone out and lived in the world, for the world, of the world, how interested are you in them coming home? How interested, are you fighting for that, sacrificing for that, giving to that? Or are you just kind of like, it doesn't really matter to you? Or are you angry because they partied for 10 years straight while you've been a good little Christian in church, right? I mean, if God's going to let people like them in heaven, you're thinking, man, I should have partied the whole time. You're thinking, I should have had that affair when I had the chance. If God's just going to forgive all that, I should have stepped out. I should have done that stuff. Well, what's your attitude towards lost people? I mean, when we talk about doing things here at church, shifting things here so that we can better reach the lost, what do you think when I say things like that? Well, we're the ones that have been here the whole time. You should base things on us, not them. They're not here. Pastor, we're the good Christians. We're the good people. We're the ones who are here. Shouldn't you base things on us, not on them? We should do things that make us happy. We shouldn't base what we do on them. We should base what we do on us. Don't kill the fat calf for them, Pastor. Kill it for us. Party for us. If you want to know whether you're the older son or not, if your heart has drifted from the heart of God, even though your body hasn't drifted far from the church building or not, these are the questions you need to ask yourself. Won't be easy, right? Won't be easy. And listen, it's going to be worth it though, because this parable ends and the older son doesn't come back. That's the end of the parable. We already read it. It's done. So the older son has not been reconciled. The older son has not gone, oh, you're right, Dad. I'm so sorry. I got judgmental for a second. I got proud. And yes, let's go celebrate. I'm so glad my brother is back. Like, he never does that. Isn't this a warning from Jesus? He's going, if you're the older son, you better get things right. It's going to be hard. This should sting. It's worth it. And listen, if you find yourself in that place, I have good news. I know why you're there. I know why you are an older son. Because, listen, it's when you forget what you were like before you knew God that you start to become judgmental and selfish like the older son. Right? That's how it happens when you start imagining yourself as a good person because you've avoided some worldly sins like drinking, drugs, sex, materialism. And that's when you start drifting towards the older son's situation. Because within your heart and mind, your sins of attitude and heart, they start to run rampant, just like their sins of action and passion out in the world. And then we stop seeing our judgmentalism, jealousy, and pride as sins. We stop seeing that as a big deal, and we start to call them faults or shortcomings or that's just my personality type, Pastor. And so slowly we become very critical, judgmental, unloving, to such a degree that when we see a younger brother return from sin, ask for forgiveness, repent, and be received by our Father in heaven. When we see the lost found and the dead made alive again, we respond with anger. Or maybe ambivalence and apathy. We just don't care. We're unmoved. It's because you forgot who you were before Jesus. You need to remember. And I have more good news. I not only know how you got here, I know what you need to do to fix things, to get right. If you're the older son, here's what you need to do. Humble yourself. Step in line behind your younger brother and come home. Listen, the steps are the same. Step 1, godly sorrow. Feel the weight of your sin, your pride, your judgmentalism, your selfishness. Feel it. Don't brush it off and start to say, yeah, but I've been in church and I'm not a murderer and I don't cheat on my wife and I don't this and I'm a pretty good person. And then slowly you're just pushing that godly sorrow down to where it's not an issue, or you turn on the TV, or you get on Facebook, or you look at Pinterest, or you throw the earphones in just so that you can be distracted from this feeling of conviction and guilt, true guilt and godly sorrow. Don't do that. Don't just brush it off, because he who fails to recognize himself fails to recognize God. Feel it. But listen, don't stay there either. Because what's step two? Come home. Get back to God as soon as possible. Do what the younger son did. Humble yourself. Apologize. Accept the consequences. Realize that you aren't owed anything but death and hell, no matter how good you think you are. Ask for forgiveness, and just like God accepted your younger brother and maybe accepted you many years ago, He'll accept you back into His family now. When you return to Him. All you have to do is return to Him. Just like with the younger son, our God is just waiting, hoping, watching, longing for your return with arms stretched out. His love for you is so big, so lavish, so deep. There's no corner of the world where you could outrun it or hide from it. He loves you. Just go home. Just come home. My heart breaks for you who are these older brothers because you're so deceived, and I just want you to come home. I just want you to remember how you were before Jesus and just come home and get to work, man. Let's get to work going out to get the younger sons, right? Let's get to work. Let's not compare. Let's not talk about fair or unfair. Let's just get to work because it's all fair because none of us deserve anything. That's the foundation. Are you tracking with me? The foundation is that you are owed nothing from God. Not long life, not salvation, not healthy sons or daughters, nothing. God owes you nothing, just like He owes them nothing. And so when they come in and they get saved and God blesses them and God gives them, it doesn't matter. There's no fair or unfair. It's all fair because none of us, or maybe a better way to say it is it's all unfair. Because none of us have worked for this. None of us have earned this. None of us deserve this. Anything given to us by a loving God is His grace and His mercy, right? Anything. Pleasures on this world, salvation, heaven, all of it is given by a gracious and loving God, and we deserve none of it. And so my heart breaks for you if you've been at home working while your younger brother has been out, and you've slowly just fallen into this pattern of pride and selfishness and judgmentalism. Ask yourself those questions I mentioned earlier. What do you think about lost people coming in? Are you sold out to that idea? If not, you might be like this older son. My heart breaks for you. And the process is just the same. Let the godly sorrow sink deep into your heart. Don't stay there. Come home. Come home. So after a story about a father and his two sons, this quote from Tozer makes some more sense, right? Let's read it again. Because God is self-existent, His love had no beginning. Isn't that good news? Because He is eternal, His love can have no end. There's no way you can outrun the love of your Father. Because He is infinite, it has no limit. Because He is holy, it is the quintessence of all spotless purity. It's pure. Because He is immense, our God, His love is an incomprehensibly vast, bottomless, shoreless sea. How great is the love of our God for you and for me. It's like the unconditional, all-in love of a good father towards his two knucklehead sons. Why don't you stand with me? Here's my prayer for you today. May you feel the weight of your sin, outward and inward. May you realize that God's grace is sufficient nonetheless. And may you come home to the Father who loves you with an everlasting love.
Thank you for listening to this audio message by Green Bay First. Pastors and speakers, you're welcome to copy this in your own sermons. Just don't sell it for monetary gain as your own. Feel free to make copies of this audio message file to give to others, but when doing so, please copy it in its entirety as it is presented here. Again, Thank you for listening, and we pray that God's Spirit used this message to draw you closer to Christ.